Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Cesar mentioned earlier, he's a new kid on the block, and I'm perhaps newest kid on the block, having joined CALSTART only a few weeks ago. So it is my pleasure to be closing out our program today with the last panel session. Since I know we only have about 20 minutes and I want to make sure that we have a really robust discussion with our guests, I'm going to jump right into the questions. So we've been hearing a lot today about the diversity of the transportation system, the suite of solutions that are needed, addressing equity issues. So Assemblymember Bonta, I want to come to you first. What are some of the barriers that your constituents have been raising with you with respect to getting them into an electric vehicle?
Thanks so much, and it's a pleasure to join you all. I'm Assemblymember Mia Bonta, and I proudly represent one of the most diverse districts in the state of California, and certainly in Northern California. It's Assembly District 18, Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. And of this, as a assembly member for this district, I know that our constituents talk about a few things. One is first, funding access. Many of my constituents rely on public funds to supplement their transition to EVs, such as the Clean Cars for All program. And while these funds were currently provided are a step in the right direction, the reality is that we are facing an automotive chip shortage where dealers raise their market prices significantly, which has an impact on the buyer. It gets passed through, and we want to look forward to and work towards increasing the grant amount that's available for our constituents, especially during the shortage time. I think a second issue is language access. Many of my constituents in Alameda County, where I nested, we're the fourth most diverse county in the nation. More than 43% of the county speaks a language other than English at home. And we really need to make sure that our constituents have the ability to have language assistance as they are making their EV purchases, and when they're applying for public funds as well. And the third barrier is charging access, probably the most significant, where while we're relying on CalGreen has required all new single family homes to be EV capable, the currently proposed code update requires only 40% of parking in new multifamily housing to be wired for charging. And that means that we're excluding a significant number of Californians who live in apartments and condos. And largely many of these are low-income people who also may be of color, and from being able to access EV charging at their home. And that really creates a situation where we aren't putting people in the best position as we invest in infrastructure, if they're renters, condo owners, kind of live in more highly dense areas, to be able to take advantage of the $900 million in expanded affordable and convenient EV infrastructure that we are moving towards. And I'm really looking forward to making sure that our legislature and my colleagues focus in on that.
Great, thank you. Picking up on the funding thread, which we've heard a lot about today, which I'm very excited to see, these programs grow. Turning to Assemblymember Ting, I know that you've been integral in authoring several pieces of legislation in California addressing zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure goals. Could you talk a little bit about those, and in particular, some of the funding programs that are addressing some of these challenges that Assemblymember Bonta mentioned?
No, absolutely. I think it's a great question, great point. As you know, I initially authored the Clean Cars for All, the Clean Cars bill back in 2018, setting a goal of clean cars, only new clean cars on the road by 2040. Unfortunately, we're going to have to get that through. But now with the governor's executive order to have clean cars, only new clean cars on the road after 2035, I think we are well on our way to moving very aggressively to make sure that passenger vehicles on the road will be clean. I was able to author AB 2127 in 2018 to ensure that the CEC develop a statewide assessment of EV charging infrastructure, and that it requires that the CEC update this every 2 years, that they are also looking at how do we support enough charging infrastructure, how do we get enough charging infrastructure to support the 5 million zero emission vehicle goal by 2030. That was an original goal set by the Brown administration. So that's very, very critical, because we constantly hear that we don't have enough charging infrastructure. Assemblymember Bonta talked about really her constituents. I have a number of working family constituents, lower income constituents. If you live in a multi-family environment, it's very hard to figure out how do you charge your car. Most people right now, almost everybody charges their car either at work or at home. So if you don't have access to charging at home or charging at work, then you're left out of that clean car revolution. So I think we definitely need to ensure that there's adequate access to charging. Also, my AB 841, which was enacted in 2020, it had a piece of it that talked about ensuring that 35% of IOU ratepayer charging infrastructure be built in underserved communities. So I think that's very important because oftentimes those underserved communities are the ones living in multifamily units or where they have units where they don't control whether they can put car charging into their homes. So I think that's a very critical component. I think that from a state component, something that we actually have to look at. From a budgetary component, I mean, we now have made huge investments into clean car infrastructure, clean transportation infrastructure. Last year, we appropriated about $3.9 billion. The governor is proposing about $6 billion. This is just a historic investment, whether it's on fleets, whether it's on medium heavy duty, whether it's on passenger vehicles, whether it's on EV charging. I think this is just major investments so that we're really able to move toward a clean transportation infrastructure. I'm sure many of your speakers talked about. I mean, what's the importance of it? We're not going to hit our GHG goals if we don't move towards clean transportation. Transportation accounts for almost 40% of our greenhouse gas in California, and it's even larger when you start talking about the impact of the oil industry and all the GHGs are developed through petroleum extraction and petroleum development. So again, that just gives you a small highlight of what we're doing budget-wise as well as legislatively.
Thank you. Small highlight, but big impact, big dollars. Really excited to see it and see the expanded budget going to this area. So Aaron, turning to you now, and speaking of funding, addressing some of the issues of equity, affordability that have been, topics throughout all of today and all of our work, how does the potential November initiative or the Clean Cars and Clean Air Act impact this light duty market?
Yes, thank you so much for this. As the Assembly members have mentioned, we are looking at an amazing budget proposal from the governor that is going to be going to the Assembly and the Senate to decide on how much we're going to invest in this clean car and clean transportation transition. The problem is that unfortunately, it still doesn't meet the level of investment that we need. Even with this historic level of investment, it still is not enough to make the transition in the timely fashion that we're looking for to be able to have 100% clean cars by 2035. As a millennial, I actually was going to buy an electric car this year as my next car, but I didn't have anywhere to charge it because I currently live in mobile home with my family and we don't have a garage. There was no way or ability to charge the car. So it made me out of that market immediately. And so the thing is that we need to make sure that we are providing this funding for these marginalized communities and also providing different packages like Member Bonta was talking about. So the Clean Cars and Clean Air Act is basically a proposition that put it on the ballot to make it so that people who are making $2 million a year or more are taxed a little bit more in order to be able to add more money to these programs, to be able to add more money to make sure that low-income individuals are able to get opportunity to get these cars, that there are charging stations and multiple charging stations in these marginalized areas. And also this money goes to fire prevention, which is really important and a very important thing to add to this proposition is that, California has an extended fire season. It's becoming that fire season is almost year round now. We need to make sure that we are putting as much money to give our firefighters the technology to be able to fight these fires and to prevent them before they happen.
Thanks, Aaron. Assemblymember Ting, I want to turn back to you. We heard our CEO, John, at the outset mention this, we don't say it often, but budget surplus that we're fortunate to have right now. But that, isn't always the case. So when we're looking at beyond the next few fiscal years, and kind of ensuring that there's long-term funding for ZEV vehicles and infrastructure. What is the legislature's thoughts on reauthorizing the Clean Transportation Program, which is currently set to expire in 2024?
And which one are you referring to, I guess?
Good question. I think it's my understanding that it's called the Clean Transportation Program. Aaron or Assemblymember Bonta, maybe you have more context. I'll admit I'm actually based in New York, so I am currently learning more of the California legislative landscape and all of these names. So if there's more than one, that's very hopeful, but I believe it's sort of the overall funding package.
Well, of course, there's the California Comeback Plan, right? And that budget has 2 to 3 years of funding from budget surplus. And then, of course, now we're doing the blueprint. So the comeback was passed last year. So could you start from there and then we'll move on and expand?
So again, the governor's put a number of proposals together around clean transportation. So we are, we're looking at the $6 billion proposal. It goes through the legislative, committees to see what we like, what we don't like. I'll just tell you what some of the legislative priorities are. Obviously, because of the GAN limit, we have to spend a certain amount of money on infrastructure. And so we're required either to refund that money to taxpayers or spend it on infrastructure. So therefore, we are looking at different ways to spend that. So we had talked about, as an assembly, spending money on public transit, making sure that we're doing investments in transportation in terms of infrastructure. So some of that could be, EV charging installations. It could be, making sure that there are, roads being fixed. But I think there's a wide swath of programs that could be funded. Having said that, I think we have a number of effective programs which have been working in terms of the clean vehicle rebate program, as well as looking at continuing to incentivize people moving towards clean, heavy, and medium light-duty vehicles. And so I think that's important to do, trying to transition our fleets into cleaner transportation. So again, there are a number of proposals that we're looking at. I think it's absolutely clear from an advocacy standpoint is to really ensure that we are doubling down and pushing for cleaner transportation. I know that from an advocacy point of view, that a lot of folks have been focused on the fleets. I am concerned that right now we definitely want to start transitioning the fleets, but I'm also very concerned that we still have very limited alternatives in terms of fleets. We are at an inflection point around passenger vehicles. So I do think we should make sure that we're properly investing and making sure that all our communities are able to participate in that clean car revolution, because I think we have a very narrow window to ensure that we actually move towards clean cars. I mean, for all of us who've been in this space, we all watched that documentary about, who killed the electric car. We know that while there was widespread adoption, widespread interest, that, because of a number of industry factors, those cars were eventually killed. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we are moving towards clean transportation. I think it's likely, but I think it's really imperative on advocates and community members to stay very focused on ensuring that infrastructure is being built, that access continues to be an issue. I know that there's now that we finally have used clean vehicles, I think it's important for a number of working families, working communities. They generally don't buy new cars. Working families buy used cars. And so now that we have a number of options in terms of used cars, I think it's really important that we take a hard look at how the used car programs are going, making sure that those are being accessed by a lot of working families, because they can be quite reasonably priced. So again, I think that's all the variety of, those are some of the variety of areas we'll be looking at in terms of funding, in terms of clean transportation.
Great. Thank you for that overview. And unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes left. This went by super fast. So I do want to squeeze in one last question for Assemblymember Bonta. Speaking of public funds and all the opportunities that are out there, should public funds be integral to supporting and subsidizing low-income community transition into the EV market?
I think absolutely, particularly in this moment, the answer to that is yes. We know right now that the rate of inflation is at an all-time high, 39-year high. Consumer price index rose 7% in the last year, which means that we know two things. One is that vehicles are going to be more expensive, particularly clean vehicles, to be able to purchase, and that gas is going to cost us even more. So in this moment in time, when we're actually pushing particularly low-income families to be able to purchase new vehicles, even if they're used, we need to make sure that that our government in the state of California is doing all it can to ensure that we're using public funds to be able to subsidize those kinds of purchases. And without that, we're really not going to be able to meet our emission reduction goals as they are set currently. So in order to be able to make sure we're not leaving low-income families behind, not leaving people of color behind and communities of color behind, we need to make sure that we're doing that.
Karen, I saw you very enthusiastically nodding when I asked that question. And maybe if you wanted to add something in the last like 20, 30 seconds that we have here.
In the last 20, 30 seconds, I just say that we have ambitious climate goals, and the only way that we'll move forward is together. And as part of that is by investing in these marginalized communities that have been forgotten and left behind, and making sure that they are a key part in this transition. And so 100%, we need to reinvest these public funds to give folks access.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your time today. I'm going to transition it over now to CalStart's Vice President of Policy to wrap us up for the day. Thank you to all my panelists.